There's a moment quiet, almost unnoticeable when you hesitate before speaking your truth. A flicker of doubt, a glance at someone's reaction, a recalibration of your tone. It's small, but it's real. That's where it begins. The craving, the addiction, the need to be validated. It's not vanity, it's survival. Somewhere along the line, we learned that being ourselves wasn't always safe. That approval had to be earned, that love, attention, and acceptance were conditional, and so we adapted. We crafted personas, shaped our tone, filtered our desires, all for one purpose: to be liked, to be chosen, to be acceptable in someone else's eyes. We lost something in that transaction: our essence, our edge, our power. Carl Jung called this the creation of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or discard because they threatened our belonging. Every time we bit our tongue, every time we wore a smile that didn't belong to our soul, every time we dimmed our joy, our rage, our truth, we sent those parts into hiding. And what was born in their place was the persona, the mask we wear in public. The charming one, the agreeable one, the successful one. But behind the mask, behind the applause and the social media smiles, lives a gnawing hunger. Am I enough? Validation becomes our drug. We don't just want it, we need it to feel real, to feel worthy. But the more we chase it, the further we drift from our core. Because every time we bend for approval, we break a little inside. That's the cost no one talks about. We live in a world that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity, a society that praises curated perfection while secretly fearing raw truth. And in that world, validation becomes a currency we trade pieces of ourselves for without even realizing what we're giving up. But here's the secret. The moment you stop seeking validation, real power begins to flow. Not because you've arrived at some higher status, but because you've returned to yourself. That is the silent revolution. And it always begins where few are willing to look, in the shadow. It starts early. Before you knew what validation meant, you were already starving for it. A raised eyebrow from your father, a disappointed sigh from your mother, a gold star at school, a smile when you followed the rules, tiny cues that told you, this is what love looks like: conditional, earned, fragile. Be a good girl, be a good boy. And without knowing, you began editing yourself. You learned which emotions brought warmth and which brought silence. You discovered that anger got you labeled difficult, that sadness was inconvenient, and that being too loud made people uncomfortable. So you shrank, smiled, complied. You made yourself palatable. And it worked. For a while. But something else was happening beneath the surface. The parts of you that didn't fit the mold, the boldness, the defiance, the wild curiosity, the strange ideas, those got pushed down, hidden away in the shadows. Jung called this the formation of the shadow self, the hidden repository of everything you were told not to be. And the tragedy is that shadow doesn't just hold your pain, it holds your power. As children, we don't have the language to understand this fragmentation. We only know that being loved feels good and being rejected feels unbearable. So we keep choosing the performance over the truth. We keep trading authenticity for approval. The world smiles at us when we do. Teachers praise us. Parents beam with pride. Friends include us. But deep inside, a quiet fracture forms, a disconnect between who we are and who we pretend to be. That fracture becomes the source of 1,000 insecurities later in life. The fear of being too much, the fear of being alone, the need to please even when it hurts. We grow older, but the child within us is still chasing gold stars in grown-up forms. Promotions, likes, praise, relationships that validate our worth. And here's the hard truth: what began as survival becomes a prison, a loop we can't break because the original wound was never healed. But healing starts with awareness, with the courage to look at that child who silenced themselves just to be safe and to say, you don't have to do that anymore, because the moment you stop seeking to be acceptable is the moment you become whole. We all wear one, A carefully crafted mask that tells the world who we are, more accurately, who we think we need to be loved. It's not built in one day. It forms slowly, subtly, as we absorb the messages around us. Don't be too loud, don't be too sensitive, be successful, be strong, be easy to love. These aren't just suggestions, they become survival codes. And so, we construct personas, not identities, but performances. The achiever, the reliable one, the good girl, the peacekeeper, the one who always smiles, no matter how much it hurts. Each role comes with applause, but also with chains. Carl Jung called this the persona, the version of ourselves we present to the world. It's not false, it's just incomplete, a curated self, stripped of contradictions, made digestible for others. But while the persona gets us approval, the shadow holds our truth, the parts of us we're afraid to reveal, the anger, the wildness, the desire, the grief, the complexity. And the more we identify with the mask, the more we disconnect from our essence, until one day we look in the mirror and realize we don't know who we are anymore, only who we've become for others. We think the mask protects us, that if we keep being what others want, we'll stay loved, safe, admired. But the cost is enormous. Emotional exhaustion, a soul that's always performing, a heart that's never at rest. You start to feel it when you smile through pain, when you say yes while screaming no, when your joy feels muted because it wasn't approved first. The performance becomes the prison. And the longer you wear the mask, the harder it is to take it off. Because what if the real you isn't lovable? What if the applause stops? But here's the truth. Real love doesn't demand a performance. And your true self, the one beneath the mask, doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. When you stop playing the roles others handed you, you reclaim the parts of you that were buried alive. That's not rebellion, that's resurrection. Because nothing is more magnetic than someone who no longer performs to be loved, but simply is. It's everywhere. The echo chamber of likes, follows, and public praise. A society hooked on recognition, addicted to performance. We scroll through curated lives, airbrushed smiles, and polished highlights. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, "You're falling behind. You're not enough. Try harder." We don't just seek validation now, we broadcast ourselves to earn it. Social media has turned our existence into a stage, and we've all become actors in the same exhausting play. Applause has become oxygen. Without it, we feel like we disappear. But Carl Jung warned us, what we project outward is a reflection of what we haven't faced inward, and society mirrors our fear of invisibility, so we hustle for worth. We compare, we compete. We measure ourselves against illusions, believing the lie that we are only as valuable as our last post, our last compliment, our last success. We become dependent on external proof of internal worth. And when the likes slow down, the silence is deafening. We panic, question ourselves, chase a newer version, a louder image, something that will get us seen again. But no amount of applause can fill a soul that hasn't accepted itself. Validation may give you a hit of dopamine, but it never brings peace. Because it doesn't matter how many people clap for a version of you that isn't real. If you have to shrink, filter, or edit yourself to be seen, you're not being seen at all. You're being consumed. There's a difference. One nourishes, the other depletes. And yet we keep going, performing for the feed, mistaking attention for affection, engagement for love. But at night, when the screens go dark, the emptiness creeps in. The truth echoes louder than any applause. No performance will ever bring you home. Because the moment you stop seeking proof from the outside, the real transformation begins. You stop chasing admiration and start cultivating presence. You stop living for reaction and begin existing for truth. That's where the power lives. Not in your best angle or your most liked moment, but in the part of you that no longer needs to be seen to know you exist. When you no longer perform to be worthy, the world begins to see you for who you really are. Not a brand, not a projection, but a human being whole, raw, enough. You don't always notice when it happens. At first, it looks like love like being needed, like being liked. You say yes because it feels good to be chosen. You keep the peace, play nice, smile often. You ignore the tension in your body when your boundaries are crossed, and instead you tell yourself, this is what it means to be kind. But slowly, quietly, something inside you begins to vanish. Piece by piece, you trade authenticity for approval until one day you wake up and realize you've gone missing from your own life. That's the quiet crisis, the slow erosion of self that comes from chronic people-pleasing. You stop asking what you want and start anticipating what others expect. Your energy is no longer yours, it's scattered, consumed, stretched thin across 1,000 silent obligations. You become the emotional caregiver, the reliable one, the always available friend, and it leaves you hollow. You smile out of habit, you nod out of fear, you perform out of survival. And yet, no one sees the collapse, because from the outside, everything still looks perfect. That's what makes this crisis so dangerous, it's invisible. There are no fireworks, no breakdowns, just a slow fading of color. You find yourself exhausted but unable to rest, surrounded but deeply alone, achieving but disconnected. That's not just burnout, it's soul weariness. The fatigue of living for others so long you've forgotten how to hear your own voice. When you outsource your worth, you're always negotiating, always asking the world to tell you who you are. And the world, loud, fickle, and full of contradiction, never gives a consistent answer. One day you're praised, the next, ignored, one moment adored, the next, criticized, and in chasing those highs, you abandon your center. The cost is enormous, your peace, your joy, your clarity, but most of all your truth. Because if you're always becoming who others want you to be, you'll never get to know the person you were born to become. And that, more than anything, is the heartbreak of it all. The world doesn't need more agreeable people, it needs whole ones. And wholeness can only begin when you stop trading your soul for someone else's comfort. There's a part of you that doesn't speak at dinner. That stays quiet in rooms where truth feels dangerous. That swallows rage, buries desire, downplays ambition. Not because it isn't real, but because somewhere along the way you were told it wasn't welcome. That part still lives inside you. Carl Jung called it the shadow, everything we repress, deny, or disown in order to belong. And ironically, it's in that very shadow where your deepest power lives. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply unacknowledged. It's the fire of your anger, the intensity of your sexuality, the boldness of your ambition, the boundaries of your selfishness, all the things that were labeled too much, unladylike, ungrateful, dangerous. And so you learn to smile instead of scream, to serve instead of shine, to sacrifice instead of speak. You learn to hide the parts that made others uncomfortable. But what no one told you is that what we repress doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits in your patterns. It shows up in the relationships that drain you, in the resentment you can't name, in the tears you cry after giving too much. The shadow speaks when you sabotage something beautiful because deep down, you don't believe you deserve it. It whispers through jealousy, through rage, through the ache of a life that looks good on paper but feels hollow in your chest. And unless you face it, it runs the show. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung said. It will rule your life, and you will call it fate. We think hiding our shadow makes us good, but goodness without authenticity is just performance. Real wholeness requires contradiction. It demands that you stop pretending you're all light and start embracing your darkness too. Because that anger you buried, it's your boundary. That ambition you downplayed, it's your calling. That selfishness you were shamed for, it's your right to self-respect. When you reclaim these parts, you don't become bad, you become real. Shadow work isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And when you begin that journey, something extraordinary happens. Your energy stops leaking. Your power returns. You no longer shrink to be loved. You expand to be whole. That's not rebellion. That's revolution. You don't chase validation because you're shallow. You chase it because, somewhere along the way, you were never taught how to give it to yourself. So you learn to find it in others, their praise, their attention, their approval. You learn to see your worth reflected in their reactions. Their eyes became your mirror. And when they smiled, clapped, admired you, felt alive. But when they were silent, cold, distracted, it felt like you disappeared. We crave what we didn't give ourselves, and so the cycle begins. You keep reaching outward, hoping someone out there can finally confirm what you're afraid to believe, that you are enough. But external validation is a fragile currency. It rises and falls, flows and vanishes, based not on truth, but perception. And perception is fickle. You could be perfect today and forgettable tomorrow. You could be everything someone ever wanted until they changed the rules. That's the trap. You build your sense of self on applause that isn't guaranteed, on opinions that aren't stable, and the more you need it, the more powerless you become. Because now, your self-worth isn't something you carry, it's something you chase. Jung would say that this is the ego's hunger, its endless appetite for recognition, for identity, for control. But what the ego wants is not what the soul needs. The soul doesn't crave applause, it craves truth. It doesn't want to be seen, it wants to be known, and the longer you feed only the ego, the more disconnected you feel. It's why you can have all the attention in the world and still feel hollow. It's why the compliments never truly land. Because deep down, part of you knows, if I need them to tell me who I am, I don't really know who I am at all. That is the mirror effect. We seek in others what we've abandoned in ourselves. And no matter how shiny the reflection, it can never replace the light we're afraid to own. Real power doesn't come from being admired, it comes from no longer needing to be. There comes a moment not loud, but undeniable when you realize you're done performing. You're done adjusting your truth to make others comfortable. Done seeking eyes to witness your worth, likes to prove your beauty, applause to validate your voice. That moment feels like a death, but it's not. It's the beginning of something ancient and rare, integration. To stop seeking validation is to stop outsourcing your identity. It means turning inward instead of outward, listening to the quiet knowing instead of the noisy crowd. It's not easy. The outside world is addictive. It rewards the polished, the obedient, the filtered. But there is a deeper world waiting inside you that doesn't care about applause. One that only cares if you're whole. Integration is the process Jung spoke of when he described individuation, the merging of what we pretend to be with what we truly are. It's when the mask meets the shadow, and instead of battling each other, they begin to dance. You stop seeing your anger, your sensitivity, your desires as flaws and start recognizing them as fragments of your full self. You begin to gather what was lost, the parts you silenced to be accepted, the truths you buried to stay safe, the gifts you disowned because they weren't convenient. And something shifts. You begin to choose solitude over superficiality, presence over performance, stillness over scrambling. You stop asking, "Do they like me?" and start asking, "Do I honor myself?" That's when you know the integration has begun. It's subtle, it won't always look impressive, but it will feel like home. Because for the first time, your life starts aligning not with the image others expect, but with the soul you've always carried. You stop bending, you start rooting. And the world, though it may not clap as loudly, begins to respond to your energy in a new way, not because you're performing, but because you're finally being. This is what it means to reclaim your wholeness. Not to be perfect, not to be liked, but to be true. There's a quiet kind of power most people never experience. The kind that doesn't yell, doesn't justify, doesn't ask for permission. It just says no clearly, calmly, unapologetically. And then it stays silent. No backpedaling, no performance. Just the sacred conviction of a boundary that no longer needs to be defended. That moment changes everything. Because up until then, you've probably lived your life explaining yourself, softening your edges, offering disclaimers for your choices so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You said no, but with guilt. You pulled away, but with apologies. You dimmed your truth to avoid confrontation. But the truth is, power doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from alignment. When you start saying no without explaining, people notice. They get confused. Some get angry. They'll call you distant, cold, selfish. Why? Because you've stopped playing your part in the script they wrote for you. You're no longer the reliable one, the yes woman, the emotional mule. You've changed the rules without warning, and now they have to meet a version of you they can't control. But here's the beauty of it. Not everyone will leave. Some will rise. Some will respect it. Because when you honor your boundaries, you teach others how to meet you in truth, not transaction. You stop attracting those who feed on your compliance, and you begin drawing those who can hold your wholeness without fear. Saying no isn't rejection, it's redirection. Back to yourself, back to your own rhythm, your own needs, your own power. And when you stop over-explaining, you learn something profound. You were never supposed to convince anyone of your worth. You were only meant to stand in it. And yes, it will be uncomfortable at first. You'll want to explain. You'll want to soften the blow. But hold your ground. Let them misunderstand you. Let them talk. Because the people who truly see you don't need an explanation. And the people who demand one were never seeing you to begin with. After the boundary comes the silence. Not the kind that screams with guilt or begs for reassurance, but the kind that just is. Still, wide, unfamiliar. And in that silence, something sacred begins to stir. When you stop living for approval, the world gets quieter. The noise you used to depend on the compliments, the validations, the opinions fades, and at first it feels like withdrawal. Because it is. Approval was your drug, and now your body, your nervous system, your heart of everything inside you is adjusting to its absence. You'll feel it, the discomfort of detachment, that ache to check in, to be seen, to be told you did the right thing. But nothing comes, just silence, and it will tempt you to go back. To explain yourself, to reach for someone's reassurance. But don't, because this silence, this void, it's not empty, it's holy. It's the space where self-trust is born. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that becoming doesn't happen in noise, it happens in solitude. In the pause between your old self's need to be chosen and your new self's decision to choose yourself. And in that space, something powerful begins to grow. Not loudly, not quickly, but undeniably. You start to hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by fear, but the one rooted in truth. You begin to feel what's right without needing others to confirm it. You begin to rest not in others' approval, but in your own alignment. This silence isn't punishment, it's purification. It strips away the roles, the performance, the masks. And what's left is something rare, you, unfiltered, unfinished, enough. So sit with it. Let the silence do what noise never could. Let it heal the addiction to being liked. Let it remind you that your power doesn't come from being seen, it comes from being sovereign. Because once you stop needing the world's echo, you become your own source of truth. And in that stillness, you don't just find peace, you become it. The moment you stop performing, the shadow rises. Not to haunt you, but to be seen, to be heard, to finally be integrated. This is the beginning of real healing, not the surface kind that looks good in public, but the soul-deep kind that transforms you in private. Jung didn't just talk about the shadow, he challenged us to face it. Because until we do, we remain fragmented, split, chasing worth in pieces while our power stays buried. Shadow integration isn't mystical. It's methodical. It begins with awareness. Start with journaling, not for productivity but for honesty. Write down the things you don't admit out loud. The parts of you that make you cringe, the patterns you pretend aren't there, the emotions you were taught to hide. Let them come. Rage, envy, desire, pettiness. The darker it feels, the closer you are to truth. This isn't about shame, it's about reclamation. Then comes the confrontation. The moment you catch yourself people-pleasing, over-explaining, shrinking, pause. Ask, who am I trying to protect? Is it the child who learned that love had to be earned? Is it the woman who was told being strong made her unlovable? Awareness breaks the spell. When you name the shadow, it stops controlling you. Dream work is another doorway. Your unconscious speaks in symbols. Pay attention to the things you fear in dreams. They're often the parts of yourself you've exiled. The dark hallway, the screaming voice, the thing you're always running from. Maybe it's not a threat. Maybe it's you, asking to be remembered. And through it all, practice compassionate inner dialogue. This work is not about fixing, it's about embracing. Speak to yourself like someone who's finally allowed to come home. No judgment, no rush. Just presence. Because every part of you, even the ones you've disowned, holds a gift. Integration means letting all of you belong. That's how you move from fragmentation to wholeness. That's how you stop chasing yourself in pieces. When the shadow is seen, not as an enemy but as a guide, something ancient clicks into place. You no longer have to perform light, you become whole. And wholeness is the only real power that cannot be taken from you. Something shifts when you no longer need the room to like you. When you walk in not to be seen, but simply because you belong there. That's what makes people turn their heads. Not how you look, not what you wear, but the energy of someone who no longer asks for permission to exist. This is the paradox. The less you chase attention, the more it finds you. Because what people are drawn to what stops them mid-sentence's presence. Not the polished kind that performs for applause, but the grounded, unapologetic kind that comes from deep internal validation. You stop trying to impress and start expressing. You stop asking, "Do they see me?" and start knowing, "I see myself." That's what creates magnetic energy. It's not volume, it's resonance. It's the woman who doesn't raise her voice, but somehow still commands the room. It's the man who doesn't compete, but still leads. There's a confidence that can't be faked, because it doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the parts of you that you've seen, accepted, and reclaimed. The shadow integrated, the self restored. When you validate yourself first, everything changes. Your posture softens, your gaze steadies, your presence expands. Not because you're trying, but because there's nothing left to prove. People feel it. They can't always explain it, but they sense it. You've stopped performing and started embodying. This is not about arrogance, it's about alignment. There's no need to dominate when you're no longer afraid to take up space. No need to seek when you've already returned home. That's why your presence becomes magnetic, because it's real, because it's rare. And the world, starving for authenticity, will feel that shift. Some will admire it, some will be intimidated, but none will forget it. Because you're not just showing up, you're arriving as someone who has finally made peace with who they are. That's not charisma. That's self-respect made visible. And there is nothing more powerful than that. In a world built on filters, branding, and strategic smiles, being real is an act of rebellion. Authenticity isn't just admirable, it's radical. Because when you stop performing, you stop conforming. You begin to unravel the unspoken contracts you signed without knowing. I'll be what you need me to be so I can belong. And when you break those contracts, people will notice. Some will be inspired. Others will feel threatened, but that's how you know you're on the right path. You will trigger people. Your truth will mirror their suppression. Your boundaries will expose their entitlement. Your refusal to shrink will make them confront how often they've abandoned themselves to be accepted. Don't let that reaction make you retreat. Let it confirm something sacred. You are no longer shape-shifting. You are no longer dimming to be digestible. You are no longer adjusting your rhythm to match a song that was never yours. Carl Jung said that, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And he was right. Because when you do, everything built on pleasing, pretending, and proving begins to fall away. What's left might feel lonely at first, but it's a clean kind of lonely. A holy solitude that says, "I'd rather be real and alone than adored and hollow." Being whole over being liked, it's not a motto. It's a spiritual choice. A declaration that you will no longer sacrifice your integrity on the altar of approval. That you will no longer decorate your cage and call it safety. because the world doesn't need more versions of the same persona, it needs you. Unfiltered, unpolished, unafraid. And no, it won't always be easy. You'll lose people, opportunities, comfort, but what you gain is everything: self-respect, clarity, peace, and a kind of freedom that cannot be taken, only chosen, again and again. Authenticity may not win the crowd, but it will awaken your soul, and once you taste that kind of alignment, there's no applause loud enough to make you betray yourself again. Love, true love, doesn't want your performance, it wants your presence. It doesn't need you polished, it needs you whole. But for so long, we've been conditioned to believe the opposite: that love must be earned, that we must show our best self to be chosen, that we must curate, correct, and conform so that someone stays. That's not love. That's fear dressed up as devotion. When you're still seeking validation, you attract people who feed on that need. They love your performance, not your essence. They love the version of you that makes them feel safe, superior, or satisfied. And the moment you stop performing, they pull away. Not because you changed, but because you finally stopped pretending. Real love doesn't flinch when you take off the mask. It doesn't disappear when you have a bad day, set a boundary, or speak a truth that makes the room uncomfortable. Real love stays not out of obligation, but out of resonance. Because it recognizes something deeper. It says, I see you, the whole you, and I'm not afraid. That's the shift. When you stop needing to be chosen, you start choosing differently. You stop chasing attention and start attracting alignment. The ones who come into your life now aren't looking for a role. They're looking for a real connection. You no longer attract relationships built on transaction. You start calling in the ones built on truth. This is what it means to move from performance to presence, from earning love to embodying it. It means being willing to disappoint the ones who only loved your mask, so you can make room for the ones who can love your mirror, the reflection of your truest self. You won't need to beg for space anymore. You won't need to adjust your tone, soften your needs, or apologize for your depth. You'll just exist, and that will be enough. Because the love you're calling in now, it doesn't come to fill your void, it comes to walk beside your fullness. No masks, no roles, just truth meeting truth and saying yes. It wasn't stolen, it wasn't broken. Your power was never truly lost, it was leased. Given away in pieces, moment by moment, every time you chose to be chosen over being true. You didn't mean to. You were just surviving, learning how to earn love, how to be accepted, how to avoid the ache of rejection. And so, you handed over your worth in exchange for temporary approval, hoping someone else could reflect it back to you. But here's the truth most never tell you: your power was always yours, buried, maybe, forgotten, yes, but never gone. And the moment you stop negotiating with your worth, stop asking the world to co-sign your value, that power comes rushing back like breath to lungs that forgot how to expand. That reclamation changes everything. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, a new boundary, a sacred no, a long overdue silence. Other times it's fierce tears, rage, clarity. But each act, each return, rewrites your story. You're no longer the one waiting to be picked. You become the one who picks themselves. This is what shadow integration looks like in real life. Not just a concept in a book, but a lived, felt, breath by breath return to yourself. You stop pushing pieces of your truth into the dark. You stop apologizing for your edge, and in doing so, you step into a version of yourself that no longer flinches at her own reflection. You become whole, not perfect, but integrated. You no longer have to choose between light and shadow, softness and power. You realize they were never opposites. They were just you waiting to be loved back into existence. This is liberation, not because you're free from discomfort, but because you're no longer afraid to live in your fullness. You've canceled the lease, called your power home. And now, you don't just survive, you lead. You were not born to be polite. You were not placed here to please. You were never meant to walk quietly through a world that taught you to shrink. You were born to expand, to take up space, to speak in your full voice, to walk your path without permission slips or performance. The moment you stop seeking to be chosen, you become the one who chooses. You choose what stays, what leaves, what nourishes, what no longer belongs. That's where real power begins, not in being admired, but in no longer betraying yourself to earn someone else's comfort. There's something sacred about a person who no longer needs validation to move. Their energy shifts, their choices sharpen. They're not louder, they're clearer. Not harder, they're freer. Because they've remembered what the world tried to make them forget, that their truth is not negotiable. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's what you've been doing, unlearning, unbecoming, unraveling every story that told you to be smaller, softer, safer. You're not here to fit in, you're here to transform, to radiate, to remind others what it looks like when someone finally chooses themselves. You are not here to be tamed. You are here to rise again and again until your life reflects the truth you've been carrying all along, that you are already whole, already worthy, already enough. And when you walk in that truth, the world will shift. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped waiting for permission to be who you are. That's not rebellion. That's homecoming. That's power. Real power. Yours. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.